The AIDS crisis didn't really start in 1982. It just got the name that we know today. This is Here Queer and Maple Syrup, a look at queer Canadian history, an extension of my TikTok series. I'm Jacob, your host. Let's explore the AIDS crisis in Canada together. In 1981, the first cluster of AIDS cases were linked, and the name of GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, was associated based on assumptions rather than on a scientific basis. When the CDC in the US started to report growing rates of cancers and other infections among otherwise healthy queer men, it was then recognized by many other countries around the same time, giving the impression that it had spread beyond the US. In 1982, it was renamed AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, after it was transmitted via blood products and transfusions, leading health officials to realize that it wasn't just the queer community that could get it. The first officially confirmed cases in Canada were in March of that year. The real question is, did AIDS really just arrive in Canada in 1982, or was it here longer, but no one connected the dots? Prior to 1982, doctors didn't really look at clusters of people when it came to AIDS. They saw Kaposi sarcomas and pneumonia. Through retrospective diagnosis, we actually know that cases of AIDS in Canada go back to at least 1979. Where at least 2 cases are known to have been in Montreal. Some studies date the virus that would later be known as HIV back as far as the 1930s, long before we had any sort of understanding of it. But why do we think 1982 or even 1981 is the start of the AIDS crisis? Sometimes, as humans, when something is officially named, even if it is something that existed prior, we assume that's when it started, especially when looking back at moments in history. The thing is, especially when talking about something as complex as HIV/AIDS, that's just the beginning of when we properly track it. It's the beginning of when doctors had enough information to actually connect the dots, when they had enough information to properly diagnose AIDS and later HIV. So much misinformation was passed around about how it spread. Some claimed it was poppers, which are still actively used in the queer community today, and others said it was airborne, leading to campaigns from the religious right to wear masks to prevent catching what was referred to at the time as the gay plague. We still have some ads from that time that show us how much influence these groups had. At this point, they hadn't even found HIV. They had only just found AIDS, which is the result of a lack of treatment and years of severe damage to the immune system. People jumped into panic mode. there was this new disease that no one understood, and people were dying. And because it was predominantly queer folks who were getting diagnosed and dying, people leaned into that fact, keeping in mind that this was less than 20 years after the partial decriminalization of homosexuality, which happened in Canada in 1969. And by 1990, only 4 provinces and territories had protections for queer folks in their respective Human Rights Act: Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and the Yukon. An important thing to note as we talk about HIV and AIDS: HIV is the virus. AIDS is the syndrome, but it can't exist on its own. In order for someone to develop AIDS, they have to have an infection or a virus. This actually confused early research because since AIDS was identified first, they hadn't yet found the root cause of why people had it. And when you don't know what you're trying to treat, it's hard to find, research, and develop medications for it, which is why getting early funding access to research treatments is so important. Why does this matter historically, though? Well, by acknowledging that there were cases that predated the official beginning of the AIDS crisis, we can make sure that those who died before are remembered. It won't bring them back, but we can make sure that we don't do that again. It's the same as understanding other aspects of history. We learn it so we don't repeat it. I don't know about any of you, but a lot of the representation of the AIDS crisis that I've seen on stage, screen, and even in researching has always leaned more American and British. On screens, we have series like When We Rise, films like Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, and Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey. Both of those receiving Academy Awards, and all 3 from the US. We have It's a Sin, the Channel 4 drama from the UK. All of these are incredibly important, especially considering when Philadelphia was made. There's no denying that. Representation like this means that we know a lot about other countries' history during the AIDS crisis. But it also means that we know little to nothing about our own. Through my research, I've only found one Canadian-American co-production, Unspeakable, from 2019 that aired on CBC and on Sundance TV. However, it's not about the AIDS crisis per se. It takes place in the 1980s, but during what is referred to as the Tainted Blood tragedy. The only other representations we have in Canadian media are in documentary form and a handful of stage plays, including Casey and Diana, which premiered in 2024 at the Stratford Festival. Stay with me over this season of Here, Queer, and Maple Syrup as we go into more detail about the AIDS crisis here in Canada. Something to remember as we move through this series: some people died before AIDS was recognized, including Bill Kavinsky, the first Canadian to die of AIDS, and who we will be talking about in the next episode. Until next time.